instalment in FQ Discover, and I have the Sydney-based composer Ella Macens with me, and we're playing Ella's recent string quartet, A Love Worth Fighting For, in our next program in May. And we discovered Ella as part of our Flinders Quartet Composer Development Program, and her work really stood out as having an aesthetic that we really wanted to nurture. And we really wanted to see what Ella would come up with in the future. And so when our dear patrons, Peter and Leila Doyle, said that they would like to commission a new work for their 50th wedding anniversary, we immediately thought of Ella. So Ella, I thought that we would begin by talking about the creative process. I'm interested in the difference that a composer feels if they are working to a commission, you know, a specific brief, as opposed to a work that comes out of where the genesis emerges from within you, from your own sort of creative burst. Is there a difference when you receive a commission?
Look, it's been a little while, if I'm honest, since I wrote music outside of it being commissioned, which is a really wonderful thing for such a young artist. I think that there isn't much difference for me in the sense that the creativity remains the same. So I've been fortunate enough to work with ensembles that really, well, they're commissioning me to nurture my innate musical voice. And that's the flexibility and the freedom in that rapport that I think both parties are really looking for. And definitely something I've experienced with the Flinders as well. So to be given a brief in the sense that here is the instrumentation and here is roughly the time length we're looking for, in that sense, they're really strict kind of terms, and you try to honor those as much as possible. In terms of what then flows, you know, out into the music, that's what I appreciate, having that flexibility and fluidity with. So to be recognized as a composer and to receive a commission is obviously a very, very encouraging and empowering thing, which is, I think, the main separation perhaps between writing external to a commission and to receiving a commission and working in close collaboration with those artists. It's the recognition that I think many composers deserve and maybe don't always receive. And to have that opportunity to work so closely with the musicians you're writing for, there's nothing quite like that experience. And it's very valuable for both sides, I would say.
And because we were talking just before we hit the record button, we were talking about Margaret Sutherland, who is also on our program, and she only received 2 commissions in her lifetime. And, you know, what that actually says, you know, now for composers in terms of, you know, the recognition of us needing to nurture the creation of music in Australia at a certain point in time.
Certainly the avenue that it opens up is one of collaboration, and that's so important. So as a composer, you're always learning, you know, how to write for each instrument even better, and better your craft each time that you work with these musicians and these new ensembles.
String quartet to voice, with the obvious synergy of there being, you know, four parts.
Yeah.
What is the similarity there? Do you find that there is a similarity writing for voice in string quartet?
I think that's a beautiful analogy in comparison. Yeah, I definitely do feel there is a similarity. Because for me, with my kind of Latvian Baltic heritage, choral music's such a big part of my kind of musical tapestry, if you will. And so to write for the voice feels very natural for me. It's what I grew up doing, and it's what I've been surrounded by my whole life. So that innate feeling of like singability and expression through the voice, that absolutely I think can transfer onto string instruments so delicately, as it can with woodwind, of course, and other instruments too. But there's something about the string quartet in the way that each instrument is so necessary to be there to support one another. And that's what I find very curious about that. So in my new work, for example, in A Love Worth Fighting For, there's moments where, you know, like I'll leave one instrument just hanging super high in a harmonic for a long period of time. and the level of exposure that that brings to that line, it feels so vulnerable. And that's such a beautiful essence of the human kind of condition and voice that we can also emulate just through one simple technique like that. And to contrast that with moments where everyone is in and everyone is moving together to reach one particular destination as a quartet, then that's a completely different style to play with. So yeah, I think you can use the quartet to create the harmonies and create the kind of density that a choir can achieve, whether that's loud or soft or forceful or gentle. But then to use them in that very exposed form where you might have one or two movements at one time. It's very, very, you're capable of creating, I think, the emotion of the human being through such a small and intimate ensemble. Yeah.
And given, you know, that you're talking about the vulnerability of the human spirit, this piece was written in 2020, where everybody was exploring the vulnerability that we feel as human beings. Can you talk us through the process of writing a piece where you're being affected by life's events, and actually, you know, how that how the experiences that you're going through as a person who's writing music, and how they actually sort of get infused into your writing? I know that whenever I'm performing a piece by a composer who's no longer living, I just want to investigate what was going on in their life at that point in time, because I feel like it gives me, you know, sort of an added layer of meaning or answers, whether or not it does infuse the music.
I think for, perhaps not for all composers, maybe it doesn't infuse everybody, but absolutely for me, I don't think I've written one work that wasn't a response to a personal situation or experience or relationship. So for me, I think when people hear that word 2020, a lot rushes in for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people would straight away think to the global scene. For me, 2020 was absolutely not global. For me, 2020 was an absolute return to internal, as I grieved the loss of a partner that I had separated with after a very, very beautiful and long relationship. And so a love worth fighting for was a return to self and an exploring of what it meant to be so utterly grounded by sensations of grief, and reflect on, reflect upon a multitude of different emotions that come up to that space, into the heart space and into the head space, when we process something changing in our lives. So the work goes through various stages of joy, of elation, of longing, of kind of fire and tension, and then ultimately moving to a space of attempting and in turn finding closure and what that process looks like. So a love worth fighting for, to me, it makes a lot of sense. And when I listen to it, it's like a summary of the first kind of half, or the first half of last year. And it's interesting because in reflection and listening to the piece now, it's changed for me, because as time changes, things change and processes heal. And it's interesting to now be in a new year, and in 2021, things, you know, they are very different in a lot of ways. There's a lot that obviously hasn't changed as much as perhaps we would have liked. But the piece for me is an interesting reflection of how time marks something taking place, and then the time that follows that piece being composed, you kind of witness then a greater journey that takes place. So I'm very excited actually to come to Melbourne and hear this work performed live. I've only heard it once online. And for such a personal work, I look forward to seeing how I feel when I'm in that space with you performing the work, because it always changes at that point as well.
As an artist, I feel like we're always growing, and we're always changing, and we're always looking for ways to develop the ways that we work and the ways that we actually sort of investigate our own creativity. Have you found that changing over the years, and do you have a hope for the future in terms of how your exploration of your own creativity will change in the future?
I think that creativity and like musical expression is always developing and growing. Whether that means it actually changes so much. I mean, I'm not looking for a new voice at this stage. I feel very confident with the compositional musical voice that I have access to at the moment. But of course, then on top of that, the experiences of composing for different ensembles, for different contexts, in response to different works in the program and so on, that definitely influences what happens in that compositional space. So in terms of it my compositional voice expanding? Yes. Changing? No. So inherently, that's what I work to always keep very organically connected to. In terms of the future, I'm in a kind of a funny position at the moment. Not funny, it's quite curious and exciting in that I have this absolute love and fascination for playing pop songs on the piano, arranging different pop songs on the piano, writing lyrics for more pop kind of folk music. And that's usually where a lot of my compositions actually start. So much of this string quartet actually began at the piano with me singing and mucking around with different harmonizations on the piano. And some of these movements very well could actually be pop songs for voice and piano. And then I go and orchestrate them out. And so for me, I have this real longing feels almost like a return than a departure, to return back to that pop side, which is what essentially got me into composing in the first place. I can remember playing different pieces on the piano by, say, Missy Higgins, Australian artist, singer-songwriter, and kind of looking at her sheet music when I was old enough to kind of make sense of it, and then looking at my hands as I played them, and I was like, oh wow, like they move in similar patterns and shapes to when I compose and when I improvise. So that was when I first kind of felt that connection with composition. So at this stage, in terms of the future, I do have a bit of a desire actually to branch out a little bit and follow more of that path and see where that takes me. I'd love to work with other artists, help other musicians write their melodies, write their chord progressions, and in time orchestrate their works as well. So more of a kind of studio-based experience would be really, really exciting for me. And at the same time, continue what I'm doing already, because I just absolutely love it so much. So I've just finished a new work for the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, which they will premiere in September. So I will definitely let you know, Zoe, when that's happening. I'm writing a new work for a couple of choirs, a choir in Latvia, Sydney Chamber Choir, a new work for the Australian Latvian Festival taking place in Sydney at the end of this year. What else am I working on? A new work for the Canberra Symphony Orchestra. There's a lot going on in the little composition shed here. So I look forward to it. It's all really, really good, and I'm in exactly the right place for me at this time, and feel very supported in this space as well.
Oh, isn't that a wonderful thing to hear? Now, as a final question, if I was to look on your music playing device, and
this is what I ask others. Now I'm getting asked
what's the last thing that you would have listened to?
Oh, good question. Well, actually,
let's make it an honest one. Look at it right now.
Right now. Would you want to know right now? On my YouTube is Imogen Holst, because you shared with me Fantasy Quartet.
That's right. Oh, that's kind of cheating, isn't it? Yeah,
it is a bit cheating.
Because I was force feeding.
No, but that's, yeah, let's talk about that. It's a beautiful, beautiful quartet. And as I believe that you are going to be performing that as well in the same program as this work.
Well, look, and it's interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I shared it with you, is because we paired your piece with the Fantasy Quartet by Imogen Holst, because we felt like there was a synergy in voices, obviously very different, and Imogen comes from sort of a Vaughan Williams like English pastoral kind of world, but there's definitely, I feel like there's a synergy in aesthetic between the way you both approach.
Yeah, I felt very connected to that work as soon as it started, for a multitude of different reasons, but the biggest thing being the lyrical writing. And it's so human. Like, it feels as if I was looking at pictures of her, because I don't know much about her, so I was having a really enjoyable read. And to see her face and to listen to that piece at the same time, it really spoke to me. It was almost like you could hear all of her like vulnerability in the best sense, like sharing all of herself and her story. That came across very clearly for me in that piece. I look forward to reading more about it and seeing what is written about that piece in particular.
And isn't that the wonderful thing about music, is that it is a way of getting to know somebody who's passed. We will never meet Imogen Holst, but actually through her music, we actually feel like we can have a conversation.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think with a lot of artists, there's parts of ourselves that we don't actually share in the real world. And through the music, it's almost like this hidden space in a sense, you know. A lot of artists, I think, process a lot in the composition space, that as we've just discussed, right, like there's things about my new work that you maybe wouldn't have assumed or wouldn't have picked up on had it not been kind of discussed with the composer. So I think that's all very curious, and would be such an interesting thing to look at, you know, what is in that space between the program note and the composer and the creation of the piece. Like, I'm sure there's this other parallel universe that exists there. Maybe we'll never know. Maybe that's the beauty of it all, that it can speak to so many people because there's this unspoken in the music.
And there is also, you know, the beautiful thing about music is it exists in that moment in time. So it's an art form that's incredibly fluid and changeable, I guess, you know, with the centuries as we go through.
Very powerful, yeah.
Well, Ella, it has been a delight talking to you, and I hope that in 200 years' time, people are fascinated.
Oh, I hope they're still looking and listening.
The genesis of A Love Worth Fighting For. And we are just thrilled to be performing it in May alongside works by Fanny Mendelssohn, Imogen Holst, Elena Katz-Chernin and Margaret Sutherland. And so we feel like that's if we were to have all 5 of those magnificent people, if all 5 of you were around a dinner table,
can you imagine? Oh, it'd be very, very fun.
Thank you very much, Ella.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.